So we just went through this very stressful thing where our main slide, which was supposed to be an interactive animation, it didn't come through. It's like it's stuck in the server. So, yeah, can everybody hear me? Yeah? OK. But I'm going to ask you to imagine it, right? And I'm going to explain it to you. So my name's Aria, and I run a very small startup called Theater.js. And well, our upcoming product is a design tool. But I'm not here to talk to you about our product. Instead, I want to talk to you about design tools in general and a shift that I believe design tools are going through. That's going to change. First of all, it's going to make our jobs easier. It's going to make our jobs faster. And at the same time, it's going to open up new creative possibilities. So it's not just about making things faster and a little bit quicker, but it's going to enable us to create things that we were not able to create before. So, so here's where I'm going to just use this Figma thing to instead of the slides that I told you about. So the way we do our design work today is that, well, we start with this environment. It could be a sketch, it could be Photoshop or something like that. And well, we start with the process of design, and then we hand it off to a developer. And a developer basically takes what we have created and recreates it in code. And by doing that, he or she is adding functionality, doing the functionality. So we do the form, they do the function. And closer. Ah, yeah. Very sorry. OK. Anybody did not follow so far? OK. And how many of you here are actually designers, by the way? So it's almost everybody. And how many of you have had this awesome experience of shipping something? So going from design, somebody do it, turn it into code, and then you have like a product on a mobile phone or something. All right? So that's still quite a few of us. And there's this very funny experience when you do that, is that if you're a designer, and if you design something, and then somebody codes it up for you, and then you start, like you see it on your mobile phone or something, and then you start playing with it. After you start playing with it, you come up with new ideas. Once you see your work in the wild, in the real world, functioning, then you come up with new ideas. Ideas that you could not come up with before in the prototyping or design stage, basically. And this is just a question for a lot of people. Like, why do some certain ideas only come when the design is already coded and it's already in a final product? Now, I don't have an answer to that, but I do know that when you play with a final product, you come up with different kinds of ideas. The thing is, we have this process where we go from, well, we don't go from form follows function. We kind of do it in a different way. We say that we picture the function in our heads and then try to be as accurate as possible. Then, as you come closer, I make the microphone closer to my face. It's a direct relation to the distance. Anyway, oh, sorry about that. Yeah.
I'll just stick here now.
So we don't do this form follows function thing. We picture the function in our heads, and design something, then somebody else puts the function on top, and then we see the final product, and then we get new ideas on top of it. Okay, or at least that's when really good ideas come from. And well, it's a backwards process. I mean, why not have a design tool like this? So imagine, I'm on a website, and so here's a website. Right? Imagine that you have made that website. You designed it, and then somebody coded it for you. And now it's online. You go to the exact same address that your normal users go to. And then you look at your website, and you realize, it could be so much better if this button was yellow. Well, in a normal process, you probably go back to your Sketch, Figma, Photoshop source files or your design system wherever you have it. You find the button, you change the color to yellow, you call the developer, hey, or Slack message the developer, hey, we have a new change, we have this handoff process. They take it, they, again, figure out what has changed. It's this whole process. It's this whole distance between your idea, what you have in your head, and what you can actually touch and feel. But what if your design tool actually worked like this? When you go to your website, and again, this is the exact same address that your users go to. It's the same website, right? And you right-click, you find that button, you right-click on it, and you see this menu. And there's this design item in it. And you click on that menu, and you see your design tool on top of the website, on top of the live website. You pick the button, you open the color picker, you change the color, here's yellow, and then there's this button on top, pull request, which tells the developer, hey, we have a new design. You don't have to code it up. It's already coded up for you. Just accept it. Now, from your perspective, from our perspective, from the perspective of the designer, this is so much better because this is not just some bunch of pixels and vectors that I have done. This is an actual button. Okay, it's yellow. I'm going to click on it. I get a feel for how does it feel? How does it feel for this to be yellow, or for that thing to be bigger, or any kind of change that you can imagine. So this is much more of a form follows function thing. Okay, it's much more collaborative. You start with something with a small design. The developer helps you on top, to make your buttons interactive because that's the job of a developer. Making things interactive, adding logic on top of them, and then you continuing on top of that. It's much more of a back and forth process, and it's natural. It's kind of like it's kind of like sculpting. You don't have this other model of the sculpture and then the actual sculpture elsewhere where somebody else sculpts it for you. You do it yourself. You get a feel for it. So this thing would be so much better. And what we call this is a dynamic design tool. And this is not our tool. These are Photoshop panels. I did not want to talk about our tool. These are Photoshop panels. But yeah, just imagine them, designing things when they are live. So I believe this is going to be a big change, and it's not just us who is working on such a tool. It's a whole bunch of companies actually. And it's a culmination of research from decades actually. In fact, the very first computer-based design tool was much more dynamic than the stuff that we have right now. It was kind of impossible to have a dynamic design tool that has the fidelity and the flexibility of something like Photoshop, and that's why we don't have it yet. But all this research, all these decades of research is coming to fruition, and there are people working on it on both universities and also commercial projects. And in the not so distant future, we're going to have design tools like that, dynamic design tools. And the main point is about this dynamicness. When you have a dynamic, when you design stuff in a dynamic way, that means that the end user, just like you who are a designer and just change the color of that button, the end user can do that too. So it's not just us, the makers, it's also them, what we call the end users, who will be able to customize stuff. It's kind of like having a bike versus having a modern car. A modern car is not a customizable thing. It's kind of locked down. And if you want to customize something for anything, basically, you have to go back to the maker of the car. As opposed to the bike. When you get a bike, you can customize it. You can change all the stuff on it. You can add attachments to it, you can paint over it. And by changing it, not only do you, affect your own life, make your life easier, with those attachments, but also it could be an expression of you. So it has both of an artistic aspect to it and also a functional aspect to it, if they are separate at all anyway. Now, we are predicting that in the not so distant future, everybody is going to be able to customize the stuff that they use, the digital products that they use. And this is a big, it's a big claim. But I think it helps to look at the history of some of the technologies that we use to get a perspective on why this thing might actually be usable for everybody. So let's take a look at computers. Computers used to be called, electronic computing machines, some obnoxious name. They were big, they were gigantic, they had their own roofs. Incredibly expensive, and their use was just limited to military and some very specific kind of research. And there were people back then, back in the 50s and 60s, who would prophesize and predict that someday, everybody is going to be using computers, everybody. And these were very smart people. At the same time, there were also some other very smart people who totally disagreed with that idea. These smart people said that, everybody could use a computer for accounting perhaps, and some other stuff, but people don't have that much computational needs for it to warrant them, having a computer, owning a computer, and operating a computer. And this was not a stupid idea at all. Okay, these were very smart people, and they made a well-informed statement. But we now know that they were wrong. Computers became cheaper, and it went from being just for military research to being available to enthusiasts. So at some point in history, on every street, you could find a couple of houses who had a computer in them. And then nowadays, everybody has them, and we don't even call them computers, we call them phones, And perhaps a couple of decades from now, we're just going to call them stuff, in our shoes and our refrigerators and everything. It becomes ubiquitous. And take a look at the names. It goes from electronic computing machines, and as it becomes more widely used, it becomes computers, the name simplifies. That's the process that names go through. As a technology becomes available to more people, it gets cooler and shorter names. Now we call them phones. The same process happens for, networks. It used to be that these were called computer networks. It just connected people who had academic institutions. And it was just for academic researchers. And there were people who predicted, someday everybody is going to be connected. And to some other smart people, that sounded like a very stupid idea. And they had well-informed arguments for why that's not going to happen. They would be like, I get bored when I'm on the phone after 15 minutes. Why in the world would I want to be connected 24/7? Now we know they were wrong. It became more widespread. It got a better name, Internet, just for enthusiasts, just a few million people in the world. Nowadays, that is used, it's used by everybody. It doesn't even have a name anymore. I mean, if 10 years ago, look at the news 10 years ago, there were mentions of internet company this, and internet product that, and internet service this. Nowadays, we just say apps and social networks, things that are enabled by the internet. And the name internet, it doesn't get mentioned in the news that often anymore, unless it's broken. I mean, in Germany, we hear it a lot because our internet is broken. But I lived in Finland, and we didn't mention it anymore. And so 10 years from now, nobody's going to even mention the name internet unless you're talking about something very specific. It's like the air. It's ubiquitous. And take a look at this. they used to be for these things used to be useful for experts in their fields. Now they're available to everybody. But it doesn't mean that the internet is not useful for experts anymore, right? It's useful for everybody. The fact that an illiterate person can use the internet doesn't make the internet any less useful for a computer scientist. So when I talk about a design tool that is going to be useful for everybody, I'm not talking about something like an amateur tool that experts are not going to be using. I think it's going to be a tool that will be useful for everybody. So I think we're going to go through the same process. They used to be called, I don't know, what, some obnoxious name. Computer-based visual design system simulators, something like that. Just for researchers. Nowadays, they're called Photoshop and Sketch. For a few million people in the world, designers, us. And someday, I think the name is going to simplify so much that probably there won't be a name for it anymore. Things that we use are going to be designable. You know, when you get a digital, like, you know, you don't get a design tool for a bicycle. You know, your bicycle is by essence a customizable thing. Unless your bicycle company goes through a lot of effort to make that thing locked down, like the electronic appliances that we have today. But yeah, the digital products that we get is going to be redesignable. Now, as I mentioned, there are many people and many companies working on this, and it's interesting that a lot of these people, including me, they have the same origin story. Like, how did they get interested in this idea? How did they come up even with this idea? Because lots of people came up with the idea independently. And well, my story was like this. So when I was 10 years old, I got my very first computer. And I had been bugging my parents for like a year to buy me a computer. And they finally did it. And later I realized that they had spent 1 year's worth of savings. They had taken out a loan that would take them 3 years to pay off just to buy me that computer. Now, if you're going to spend that much money on something that you buy for your kid, then it better be put to good use. So that meant that I was strongly discouraged to do this stuff on that computer. So no FIFA 2000, no Crazy Taxi, no Midtown Madness, none of that stuff. Oh. But they did something much cooler. They got me a CD that had Photoshop 5 on it and a book about programming, the C programming language. 10 years old. Whatever. This would be just as much fun as that one. Don't worry about it. That was my parents. Okay, Dad. But yeah, it was fun actually. I put on the CD, and it had a video tutorial on Photoshop, a long, very long, like 5 hours of video tutorials on Photoshop, plus a pirated version of Photoshop 5. And I put it in the machine. I remember. I opened Photoshop, and I was just hooked. It was the coolest thing in the world. You had this beautiful canvas, and you had these brushes. You could do whatever you want in them. Blending modes and combining pictures in ways that you could not even imagine yourself before. It was a whole new world. And that was my hobby for a very long time. I loved it. I also started reading the book. And again, that was the coolest thing ever, but in a completely different way. So with the book, with programming, I could not make the beautiful stuff that I could do with Photoshop, or at least they look beautiful to me. I could not make those beautiful things. I could make very simple things, like this is when I need you to imagine what I'm saying, because we don't have the slides for it yet. So in Photoshop, imagine in Photoshop you can make a circle, and you can shade it, you can paint on it, and I don't know, effects and stuff. It would look beautiful. Now imagine that you want to also make a circle with programming. Well, you really can't. You can just make something very bland looking, very simple, single colored. But the thing that you can do with programming is to make that thing dynamic. You could make it move around. You can make it do stuff. And, well, the sense of agency that you get when you realize that you can write these lines of text and something in that machine, like a robot, is going to do them for you. And in fact, you can make hundreds of those robots do the stuff that you say for you. You can even leave them be and go to sleep and come and wake back up, and they're still doing the things that you told them to do. This is a very empowering experience. And people who have experience with programming, they know what I'm talking about. It gives you this sense of agency. That it's like it feels like your hands, your arms, and your feet are stronger. You know, you can do much more than what your body is capable of doing. You get this intuition where you feel like you can change your environment, and not just your environment, but after a while, when you start, making loftier thoughts, you can think in a way that says, you can change the world. It's a very powerful, very empowering experience. Now, here's the problem. I could make beautiful stuff there in Photoshop, and I could make dynamic behaving stuff here in C, but I could not do both. I wanted to have the beautiful orb that I made in Photoshop, which had a bunch of filters and effects on it. And I wanted to take that in the world of C and make copies of it, for example. Right? In programming, you can easily make copies of stuff. If you have one thing, it's super easy to make a million copies of it as well. In Photoshop, that copying process is just right-click, duplicate, right-click, duplicate. Even if you have the keyboard shortcuts, you have to still arrange them by mouse, and it's a very slow and manual process. But in programming, I could make duplicates of things. And you might be thinking, so what's so good about duplicating things? Well, here's one example. This artwork would not be possible without programming, without the duplication facilities of programming. And there are many more examples. I just have some from one artist. So you have these ideas that you can only do if you have access to both of those worlds, both of them together. So you can repeat things across space. That's the thing with programming and the kind of art that it enables. The other thing that it enables is that once you bring programming into the world of design, then you can make things dynamic. And when you have things that are dynamic, you already short-circuit the whole process that us designers have today. Okay? Imagine that you open your design tool and you design a button or a radio button or something like that. You don't have to wait for a developer to make that thing actually do what you want it to do, right? It already does that. And because of that, you get this feeling of, like, you have this intimate connection with your work. You still need your developer, though. You still need the developer to add business logic and performance and security and 1,000 other stuff. But when it comes to dynamicness, you are, you're your own boss, and you can just do whatever you want. I think this is an empowering idea, and it has been explored for a very long time. There are many, many, many examples that I can name. One of them, the most recent one, was Flash. These ideas fizzled out because of, technical reasons and economic reasons, but they are making a big comeback. And I just think, we have to be open to these ideas. I think the biggest thing about having a dynamic design tool is that you turn your users into makers. How many times has it happened to you when you used an app, let's say Spotify or something else, and you think to yourself, this would be so much better to use, it would make my life so much better if it could have just this one tiny little feature. That happens very common. But the apps that we use are black boxes. The only way that you can change your apps is to go to the support forums and ask for do a feature request, and hope that someday they would get your idea. And that's the thing. First of all, some of your ideas only make sense for you in your own life. You cannot expect Spotify to implement all the good ideas that it hears. Because if some idea is good for you, it could be detrimental for the use of someone else of that tool. So, and that's why you have this huge amount of duplication of work, where, for example, in Spotify, you have a search tool and an organizational tool where you can organize your music. And then in another tool, in another music player, you again have all of those stuff with some variations, and they're all just repeating. They're just repeating all that work that was done already before them. But it doesn't have to be that way. If it's not a black box, if it's an open box, and if you can customize it, then you would do it. And all this extra work that was done on those applications would just be saved. So this thing would be called a dynamic design tool. I'm not going to even talk about our tool again, because this is not a commercial. But I want to just get you interested in the power that these things could have. There is no dynamic design tool at the moment anywhere, first of all. There are tools that try to combine programming and design, but they're not dynamic design tools. So I thought to myself that I want to give you some ideas on how to spot a dynamic design tool, or even better, how to demand a dynamic design tool. So the most important thing about a dynamic design tool is that it works in a dynamic medium. It means that you never draw a picture of a pipe. Have you seen these posters? This is not a pipe, this is a picture of a pipe. We are drawing pictures of pipes, right? And we should do that, especially in when the pipe is a physical thing and what we are drawing of it is a digital thing. Of course, we have to have that process. But if the pipe is actually a digital thing, if it lives inside a computer, you don't really need for you to draw a picture of it. You can just draw it. It's just all ones and zeros, it's cheap to have a lot of them. So this is important. A dynamic design tool is dynamic from the beginning. If you design a button, it's going to be clickable from the very start. If you make a scroll view, it's going to be scrollable from the very start, from the very beginning. One of the biggest aspects of a dynamic design tool is that it allows you, designers and developers, to collaborate in a very tight loop. Not you doing something, then waiting for them to do their thing, and then finally seeing what they have done, and then coming up with ideas, but then you have to sort of filter your ideas in a way that it's doable for them because they are a stakeholder. It shouldn't be like that. Instead, you would design the button, and all the developer does is add the logic to that button. Not recreate it in code, but add the logic to it. And if you have that kind of process, then I think the designer and developer, what is this famous saying? They would be larger than the sum of their parts. You have a much more collaborative environment that way. Another aspect is that, and I think this is inherent in a dynamic design tool, that end user, actually we should even get rid of this word end user. Okay, we have this dichotomous thinking where we say, here are makers and here are users. Here are writers and here are readers. Here are artists and here are consumers. You divide the society with a line, And granted, there is a bit of logic to that, reason to that, but people are not mere consumers. And I think we have all seen that. Just with I'm a designer and a bit of a developer, and I'm not a mechanical engineer, but I do see in myself the ability to customize my bike. So even though I am a user of bikes, I would buy my bike, but I would still do something on it. I'm not a mere consumer. And all of you, every single one of you has that kind of experience with something, where you are not the maker of something, but you're not a mere consumer. The thing is, if the design tool is a dynamic design tool, if things are dynamic, then they're always dynamic, right? You don't suddenly package everything into an undynamic world and give it to users, right? Things are dynamic. So dynamic design tools should respect that philosophy and do not encourage the users of the tool, the corporations, to ship their products as black boxes. I think if you have a tool that makes it easy to ship open boxes, then a lot of people are going to do it. And just like one day, it used to be that the idea of people writing software, taking time out of their lives, many man and woman months of time out of their lives, writing a software, and then putting it online for free for everybody to use. That used to be a ridiculous idea, but now it's extremely common. I think this kind of thing would be also that common if the tools facilitate it. Another idea is that there has to be real-time collaboration. This is not a tool just for designers or just for, again, we have to remove this dichotomous thinking. And both designers and developers and also the makers of the tools that we use today are guilty of this dichotomous thinking, of putting this separation between the two. If you want to have that kind of dynamic environment, then you have to be able to collaborate together. Not asynchronous collaboration, but real-time collaboration. Thankfully, at least this one has been proven in the design world. Figma did it, and they did a wonderful job. It used to be just a few years ago where people had already seen Google Docs and how cool it is to collaborate on something in Google Docs. Yet they were very skeptical of something like Figma. And a lot of that skepticism was smart and well-informed. People want to design alone. For example, I don't like when I'm designing something, somebody else seeing what I'm doing, because that restricts my ideas. But these are not primary concerns, right? You could have a collaborative design tool where, when you want, it could hide what you're doing from your collaborators, so you can design in peace and alone. So it's not an inherent problem with real-time collaboration. It's just an implementation detail that you just have to figure out. Another extremely important aspect, this is one thing that actually killed Flash, is high-fidelity expression. With Flash, you could not express high-fidelity stuff. And I'm not going to define high fidelity, I'm just going to show it to you. So this is low fidelity, this is high fidelity, right? If your design tool is dynamic, but the best that you can make with it is something like this, no matter how dynamic this stuff are, you want to make that. Okay? Of course, there are people, and there are games and lots of apps that don't use the full power of the platform that they run on. You would find games for the PlayStation where the game has only needs something as powerful as just a Nintendo entertainment system. But most people, most designers, most makers, they want to use the most power of the platform, and that's what I mean by high fidelity. So Flash could not do that. Flash had you could make dynamic stuff in it, but the quality and the detail that you could put in there was limited. That's one of the things that killed Flash. And I think the last thing, and perhaps the most important thing about a futuristic design tool, about a dynamic design tool, is its users. This is something that a lot of us makers don't get, because we see ourselves being more powerful than we actually are. The thing is, making a dynamic design tool in a world where everybody is used to the static tools is very difficult, not just technically. Technically, it's an incredible challenge. But the mind share that you need to gain, well, it's very difficult to gain, basically. It's kind of like when you want to introduce a product that's like a helicopter to a world of car drivers, right? And you want to, don't make your user think. If they're used to driving cars, make an interface that looks like a car. Try to make the cockpit look as much as possible like the inside of a car. Have the seats there and everything. But at the end of the day, a helicopter is a completely different thing in comparison to a car, right? I mean, a car runs on a mostly two-dimensional surface by causing friction between its tires and the ground. A helicopter moves in a three-dimensional space, and it blows air. Your mode of interaction with the helicopter is going to be very different from a car. It's a leap. You have to take a leap. And I have seen in users, including myself, where I'm introduced to something that works very differently from what I'm used to, and I just reject it right away. And this is an attitude in everybody. And I think it takes a conscious effort to get past that initial barrier. It's kind of like learning to play the violin. If you want to learn to play the piano, you can start making a melody, playing a melody in just the first few days. You won't be an expert at it, but it would be a melody. If you do that with a violin, the first few days you're just going to make screechy sounds. The first few months you're going to make screechy sounds. It's going to literally take months for you to make a sound to play something that's like remotely like a piece of music that you're familiar with. But people get past that barrier because they're kind of inspired by the symphonies and the musics that they hear of violins. The thing is, dynamic design tools do not have these symphonies. Okay, there aren't enough artists to inspire the other artists to come and join this movement. So in the beginning, you have this thing like a violin, and you have no idea what you can do with it. And it just takes this adventurous mentality where you just take the tool and you play with it, and you explore and you discover what unique things you can create that you could just not create with anything else before. So that's about the users, and I think these are the users who, they don't follow trends. They are ahead of the curve, and they explore, and they are not afraid to, try things that don't work out for them. So I think if you want to, tell a design tool in the jungle, look at the users around it. All right. If they are people who are not open to new ideas, then that design tool is doomed to fail. And if there are people who are adventurous, then I don't know. I would get a high likelihood that it would succeed. I'm going to leave you with this. 2 names. I don't have the slides here, but you can write them. Actually, I can just write it here. For you. So how many people know that name? Brett Victor. Okay, I think you would all be very interested in what he is doing in this space. Just search Brett Victor on YouTube and watch a couple of his videos. And there will be a lot of inspiration for design, in the area of designing for a dynamic medium. And Jennifer Jacobs. She has designed tools that are reprogrammable by artists. And it's just the coolest thing, and I think you guys would be interested in checking her out. So yeah, thank you guys.